Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Today on Savvy Business Radio, we have a special Memorial Day episode. We're joined with Dr. Charles R. Bailey, sharing his latest book, co-authored with Lei K. Sun, entitled From Enemies to Partners, Vietnam, the U.S., and Agent Orange. Today, Dr. Bailey shares their research and the long-term crisis impacting many veterans. This eye-opening, profound interview reminds us the importance of reconciliation and healing and what we can all do as citizens to bring this about. Hi, Dr. Bailey. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio and our Heartbeat of the World segment. Thank you so much for coming out today.
It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. You're here for our special Memorial Day show. We generally don't broadcast on Mondays, but we're happy to have you here. You're talking about your very important book, your groundbreaking new book, From Enemies to Partners, Vietnam, the U.S., and Agent Orange. Now, we've never touched this topic on our show before, Agent Orange. We've heard of it before. I'm sure everyone in the audience have heard of it in some fashion, but I'm pretty certain, like myself, I didn't know too much about it, and I'm sure a lot of Americans don't, but you're really trying to get both the U.S. and Vietnam together to partner and help not only veterans here that have been affected, but Vietnamese who have been affected on their own home soil. Share with our audience a little bit about your backstory and what brought you into dealing with all this.
In 1997, Christina, the Ford Foundation asked me to go to Vietnam to open up a program of grant making. Mm-hmm. And in the course of doing that, I realized there were a number of difficulties in the relationship between the U.S. and Vietnam relating to the war, and among them, Agent Orange was the biggest unresolved issue.
Wow. And for people listening in, because I had very little knowledge of it, all I've heard a little bit of it is a good friend of my parents who served in Vietnam and who came back with a variety of health issues, sores that come up on his body. He was not able to procreate after he came back, but also it just totally ruined his marriage. He didn't go into how with me because I was a teenager when he talked to me about it, but I don't know much about it. What is Agent Orange for anyone listening who might not know about it, and what are some of the effects of it?
Agent Orange was a military name for a herbicide, a mixture of herbicides, which the U.S. used to kill forests and defoliate trees and crops in Vietnam during the war, to open up lines of fire and to deny the enemy food crops. Unfortunately, the manufacture of it was terribly faulty. And in the sloppy manufacture of the herbicides, a byproduct, totally unintended, dioxin was formed. Dioxin is the most toxic substance we know. Mm-hmm. It has no known beneficial use, but it contaminated the Agent Orange and reached people who were exposed to it.
Wow. It doesn't have any correlation to, I've heard of some of the things that it does to genetics and such. Is it similar to what radiation does to you, radiation poisoning does to your body?
No, it's quite different. It's an organic compound, and it has the effect of basically causing people to come down with various cancers and other Parkinson's diseases and various other diseases. And we first started noticing this when troops began coming home from Vietnam, and they in the late 60s, and they began coming down with old men's diseases. Mostly they were men, of course. And it's been a struggle, frankly, Christina, for them to establish the link between their service exposure to Agent Orange and their later development of these diseases. A similar story for the Vietnamese, who, of course, were there, everyone in sprayed areas, our soldiers, their soldiers, farmers, were exposed. And you see a similar pattern of chronic ill health and old people's diseases in the young. These are the directly exposed. The indirectly exposed are perhaps even sadder. These are their children and grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, both for our veterans and for the Vietnamese. there may be several 100,000 children and young adults in Vietnam today who are born with disabilities linked to dioxin.
Wow. As you're saying here with
Dioxin,
that really a lot of these diseases exist already. Now, why is it caused their body to come out with these cancers and illnesses? Is it because it breaks down at a cellular or genetic level, and then it just caused the body to manifest?
Well, the science is not fully understood as yet, although scientists are working on it. But when the veterans finally got the attention of the U.S. government, it was in 1991 when the Congress passed the Agent Orange Act, which created a mechanism within the U.S. government to review all of the accumulated science year by year. And slowly the evidence grew that there was a greater than normal likelihood that if you served in Vietnam and later developed one of these diseases, that there was a presumption of a linkage, even though there are soft tissue cancers, I mentioned Parkinson's, lymphoma, and others, prostate cancer, have a number of causes. Still, it was believed there was a link between exposure to dioxin. This link has been demonstrated in mice, and the research continues. As for the following generations, here the argument is that there's a genetic link in which the dioxin alters the genetic makeup of the individual, and that these faulty genes are passed on, leading to birth defects. Here again, the science is still evolving. Probably the field of epigenetics is going to help us get a clearer insight into the exact linkage. But overall, there are, as I mentioned, in Vietnam, hundreds of thousands of people, young people and adults, who are living daily lives with severe disability.
Wow.
Probably a similar story among our veterans. And how much longer do they have to wait before we help them?
Yeah.
Fortunately, there's some good news on this front as well.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned before when we spoke that we have started both governments to pay attention and to say, okay, there is something here. We're going to work together to start looking for a solution for this. Share some of the details on that.
Well, today, Memorial Day is of course an excellent time to reflect on our veterans, both those who died and veterans in general. And in 2015, our Department of Veterans Affairs paid $24 billion in disability compensation to about 1.3 million veterans who were in our armed forces sometime during the Vietnam era. About 40% of them, that would be about 528,000 people, were boots on the ground in Vietnam where they were exposed to Agent Orange. The VA provides them disability compensation for more than a dozen of these illnesses that I've mentioned, and some of their children, now their great-grandchildren, have been impacted. In Vietnam, there is a similar story. Only there, the U.S. is partnering with the government of Vietnam and Vietnamese and American NGOs to provide services to families with children and young adults with severe disabilities. Wow. And currently, this assistance is running at about $30 million a year.
Wow, that is really extensive on taxpayers. It's good that we're learning about this. So in the future, hopefully we don't make these type of mistakes in using really dangerous compounds and ways to find a more, maybe more peaceful way, like sitting down and talking about stuff instead of entering into war, hopefully, if possible. Now, you say that there people were boots on the ground. Now, I know there were a lot of air fighters, helicopter pilots and such. Now, is this something you have to become in contact with physically by skin, or could people who are pilots also be affected? Is it airborne?
No, I mentioned boots on the ground because the actual definition to qualify means that you served in Vietnam.
And got it.
That could include any of the branches that you mentioned.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean you were walking on the ground. You could be a helicopter pilot as well, or any of the other branches.
For example, yes.
So is this particular chemical, is it airborne? Is it something that you had to physically get on your skin? How does it affect the body in particular when you make contact with it? Did you have to get a lot of it, or is it, how did that work out?
Well, fortunately, the dioxin, although quite dangerous in minute amounts, we discovered through research I funded through the Ford Foundation, is concentrated only in a very few locations. These were former U.S. military bases where the drums of herbicide were stored and the planes were loaded, and over the years built up concentrations in the soil. Dioxin isn't water soluble, so it doesn't move very far. So if you find it, then you can clean it up. And I'm pleased to say that we have cleaned up 2 of the 3 dangerous dioxin hotspots in Vietnam. Awesome. There's 1 more to go.
Wow, that's good news. Then we're getting closer to resolving this, and then of course then it comes on to helping the families who are affected over a generation. How long does the generations get affected? Is it just the children and then the grandchildren, or does this continue until it wears out? How does this work for future generations?
We don't know.
Oh.
Okay. It's probably the case that people with disabilities don't reproduce at the same rate as the rest of the population. But aside from that general observation, we don't know.
Okay. So I remember you mentioning that you had cleaned up 2 of the sites. Now, the last site, how long is cleanup? Is it a long, tedious process? Is it fairly quick that you're able to clean up and get the land restored?
Well, in the case of the Da Nang airport, which was heavily contaminated and which has just been finished, it took 3 years and cost us, our contribution was $108 million. This is for a process that definitively destroyed the dioxin, and the soil has been returned to the airport where it's basically returned to where it was.
Great. And also go on. Yes.
The much bigger challenge is the remaining one, where 85% of the remaining dioxin resides in one airport, which is about 18 miles north of Saigon, the largest Ho Chi Minh City, the largest city in Vietnam. This is going to take probably about 10 years and maybe as much as $500 million to completely clean it up.
Wow. That's a real intense cleanup. Now, for the land and the crops being affected, how long does it take till you're able to grow fruits and vegetables that are safe for everyone there? Is it take complete cleanup before you're able to use and grow crops, or after you clean up, does it take a period of time for the land to restore itself?
Well, a point source means that it's very localized. In this case, it was right on the military base. So there was no agriculture or other use. It was active, in this case, civilian and military base. So once it's cleaned up there, it's gone. It hasn't it's no longer getting into the ecosystem. And that's the good news. It is a point source. It can be cleaned up. We are cleaning it up. We need to continue for another 10 years working with the Vietnamese. We have an excellent working relationship with them on this. There's a lot of transfer of technology, but most of all, Christina, the impact of this activity on reconciliation, of putting behind us this long shadow of the war, of that long ago war, which after all, last year was, it was 50 years ago, half a century.
Wow.
We've seen the long shadow of war, and we're beginning to get beyond that. We're beginning to emerge again into the sunlight of full normal relations with the Vietnamese. And they're an important country. If you know, Vietnam is nearly 100 million people.
Wow.
If it were located in Europe, it would be the 3rd largest country in terms of population after Germany and France. This is a country we need to pay attention to. And clearing away this legacy is the best way to do that.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And not only helping restore our relations together, but also to educate people like myself and others listening in about this. What can all of the citizens do to keep this moving forward, reconciliation and cleanup? What can we do as citizens?
Well, it's both a humanitarian and a geopolitical initiative that resonate with our leaders in Washington. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, this issue, Agent Orange in Vietnam, has been a bipartisan issue since for over 10 years now. Both parties have supported it. What people need to do is they need to tell their members of Congress and their senators that, hey, this is an important country. This is a legacy. We like reconciliation. We want to be a full partner with modern Vietnam. So let's do the right thing, clean up this remaining hotspot. Mm-hmm. At the same time, help people who are obviously in need, and work to a final resolution of this issue so that the Vietnamese and ourselves, looking back on this 50 years from now, can say, well, it took them a long time to get together on this, but once they started working together, they did as much as any reasonable human being could possibly expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good time to remember. I think I mentioned before the interview that often this time of year gets skewed by picnics and barbecues and going to the beach. But really, this is a day to remember those who've gone to fight for freedom, for our country, the veterans, and to remember all that has gone on in the past, to build reconciliation between countries where, like Vietnam, where we had once been enemies and now we are not, now we're friends, to build that partnership together so that we can both take care of our veterans and clean up there what has happened in the past, and clean it up so that both citizens here and citizens there can have the best possible life going forward. And I want everyone to pick up your groundbreaking new book, From Enemies to Partners, Vietnam, the U.S., and Agent Orange, by Dr. Charles Bailey and co-authored by Lee K. Sun. Very important. So again, I just have to thank you, Dr. Bailey, for coming to share this very important information today on Savvy Business Radio.
Thank you, Christina. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I'm glad, particularly on this day, to not only to remember, but to reconcile. And
absolutely.
Our book is a guide to the best way we can go forward on that.
You betcha. Now, is there a website you'd like to share with people where they can get your book, or where's the best place for them to pick it up?
It's available on Amazon and also at Barnes & Noble, and it's available as an ebook on either Nook or Kindle.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, I thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here today to share your great wisdom and your wonderful, groundbreaking book. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the Memorial Day.
Thank you.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.